Thanks very much, Kieran. That was great. Um, and thanks to all the speakers. We do have a bit of time for questions, and we had one in the chat that's appeared already. It's from Sarah, actually. Um, and the question was, what are some of the examples of the biggest kind of surprises your work has revealed, either to the company or to yourselves or both?
Yeah, great question. We love the counterintuitive. So, what we'll often see is that community will talk about an issue a lot, but in fact, when we do the modeling of what is it that drives trust and acceptance, that issue will be much, much less important. So a good example was in Latin America. In fact, community were talking a lot about water quality issues and dust and vibration impacts on houses and things. But when we modeled the data, what we found is that environmental impact, perceived environmental impact, really had very little effect on trust in the company and acceptance of its operation. And that was kind of puzzling. What was much more important, though, was procedural fairness, that responsiveness piece. And so when the team went back out and were engaging with community and trying to unpick this a little bit after we discussed it with them, what they found is that communities understand, if they live near a very large operating mine, that there are going to be environmental impacts. There are going to be things like vibration impacts on houses if you live just next door. And they kind of, incorporated that into their value proposition. But what they really, really didn't like, and this caused them a stoppage, in fact, was that kind of sense of disrespect because you weren't kind of willing to listen to me about those issues and how, and to help me understand how you're looking to mitigate those impacts. So what had happened is that very near neighbor kind of group, that barrier there, they talked to the mine and some of the kind of technical staff that had gone out to evaluate damage from blasting had found, technically that hadn't been caused by the operation. But that's not the experience of those community members. And so in fact, they felt disrespected and ignored, and that led to a blockade. So anyway, that was one of, and we see that a lot, which is that the things that community talk about a lot are often not the things that are most important in driving trust.
Great, thanks. So there's a couple of questions here that really could be directed to Kieran, Sarah, or Joel, and maybe it's almost, we can almost start treating this like a panel. Here's a question, another question from Russ Eli that I think is a really good one. And that is, it's sort of related to his previous one, but it's a sort of follow up. In your experience, is it common for community sentiment to flip from opposing a project to supporting a project as work progresses, or is there a way that companies can, I think as you put it, Kieran, turn things around or take a bad situation and make it better?
Yeah, well, from my experience, like I said, relationships are dynamic. That's why we measure things consistently and across time, and periodically, quarterly, or whatever it is. And actually, we see that dynamism in the data. So, I mean, you saw over 3 time points there, trust tank in that company, but differentially across communities. And at different stages of the life cycle, we've seen that as well. Early on, support for company and its activities is often very low. But I think what we've seen with some of our customers at that early stage is where they can drive investment dollars and engagement to those places about those issues that are kind of really pulling them down, that things can at least flatten out, which I think is often the best you can hope for. So that until you've been able to demonstrate and prove that you are trustworthy. And I think that's a key thing that's really often missed in this. You turn up as a mining company and you just assume that you're trustworthy. Well, why would a community think that? You have to show that in practice, and that can change across time. It can change dramatically for the worse as well, not just change dramatically for the better. But the other thing I'll note is that if a company is going along across time and not doing anything different, what we can show is that nothing changes in the relationship either. It stays pretty average, and does that help you manage social risk? Well, there's a couple of companies at the moment you might ask about that, because it didn't really help. They didn't build up a store of trust that they were able to lean into when kind of things and systems went wrong.
Sarah and Joel, did you want to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I will just add to that, because I think that there's something that's always struck me in with Kieran's research and the diagram that he had on his slides, is that trust, it's not necessarily, it's the procedural fairness element to it. It's not about buying people's support. It's not about making people like you. You know, we can probably all think about people that we don't necessarily like very much, but we trust them. Like, we trust that they will follow procedure, that they will do things correctly. So there's a big element about engaging and being respectful and honest and saying when you can't do something. And I think companies often make the mistake of thinking that people want them to say that they'll do things, but they can also say, actually, we don't know yet. We can't say that yet, but we'll keep you informed as soon as we can. And then when you say you'll do something, you do it. It's very akin to building relationships and trust anywhere in life. And one of the trite little sayings that I heard recently, but I think it's very true, is that trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. So you can takes a long time to build it up, but you can lose it like that. So that flip can happen both ways. You can build the trust up, but you can lose it overnight. And those inflection points I talked about, I mean, clearly often when you're just exploring and it's a small team and relationships have been built up and people are actually getting on quite well, can be completely thrown out of whack when things ramp up and a mine actually is going ahead and there's construction and there's lots of people and there's more jobs and that, you know, so there's all those stages, and if you need to be able to manage those and keep that level of honest, open and respectful engagement going. That would be what I'd say.
Thanks. Joel, did you want to add anything to that, or you're on mute?
I think Kieran and Sarah have summed it up quite well there, and it depends on the motive. Sometimes, in my experience, you know, what is the incentive for them to behave in such a way, to backflip? And in the place where I work, communities don't want a mine to go away. They want it, but it should be on the conditions that they understand and they agree on. And I think I read in a book that Amilcar Shipwreck wrote, and it's a very, very ethnographic account of this relationship. And I would recommend to the participants online to have a copy of this book about this social performance of exploration in a very undeveloped in part of the country, that talks about this dynamic of relationship and the motives and what drives this engagement and trust and relationship and all of this.
Thanks. So we have another one that I didn't get to before, but again, it's something that could probably be open to anyone to answer. And it's sort of, there's it starts with a statement saying, well, I guess it's a question. Does exploration engagement across the various areas of mineral, coal, petroleum, etc., increase community expectations for junior explorers? Because as I think a few people have mentioned, junior explorers are in a situation where often it's not a seasoned community relations professional or a company with a very complex and sophisticated means of mapping community sentiment. It's a geologist who's got no training, and they're the one on the ground. They're the chief geologist, chief engagement officer, chief bottle washer, chief everything. It's I guess I'm not sure. I guess the question there is, you know, how does, you know, in that sort of situation, what can a company do when it's on a shoestring in a setting like that?
Can I actually do have to go, so I will just say 2 words to that, and then I'm going to have to.
I mean, apart from take your course.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, exactly. No, take the course. But this is the thing, is that it is about finding those things that are, the image I showed of a repaired bridge, the company needed the bridge, whereas the community. Now, if you do that in such a way that you do it with the community, that they advise, they provide the materials, they maybe help with labor, it's a collaborative effort. And then you're building a relationship through that respect for people. And the other thing is, you're not in an area alone. There are people, there's government with government programs, there's NGOs with their programs, partner, work together with people so that your little contribution that you can make or what you can support is part of a bigger thing, and you're getting more into the fabric. So there are always things that investing strategically, and the IFC does also give guidance on that strategic investment. And it's those are sort of things that you can do. And when it comes to expectations, that's the thing. It's like the more they know you and the more they know what you're doing, and you can explain things to people about assaying and core sampling who are illiterate and in the middle of the bush. They understand it. It's not that, it's not you think, oh, this is all science, you wouldn't understand it. People, if you sit down and explain what's happening, they understand. And so if you explain that you're taking those samples to be tested, and then you'll see what's in it, and then you keep them apprised of what's happening, they'll know. But it's got to be honest, and it's not about manipulating people to bamboozle them. So yeah, I think there are definitely things that can be done, even by the juniors who are strapped for cash, and there have been times when they've had more, and there are times when they have less. So
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
and I'm really sorry. I'll go.
No,
But thank you so much. This was really interesting and really interesting questions too.
Yeah, no, thanks to you for your contribution. I do have a couple of other things if you guys are able to stay around a bit longer, Kieran and Joel, but
can I just touch on that expectations thing actually? Well, first of all, I think we're doing geologists a bit of a disservice, kind of paying them to be people incapable of kind of constructive relationships. I don't think that's the case at all. But when we're looking, we looked at expectations really explicitly in the Pilbara with a large mining company, and we wanted to get at that issue, in a way that allowed for a more constructive conversation about it, because it was like company was saying expectations are too high, we need to normalize these towns, and you need to revise how you think about us and what we contribute and whatever. And of course, the community are like, well, we're living in the middle of nowhere, and we're only here because of you, and this is how it's been for 50 years, and actually you need to do more to whatever. What we did with some analyses that showed that people's expectations are really driven by their sense of distributional fairness about the benefits that flowed from the operation. And it wasn't just about direct benefits, but about shareholder capture of the benefits that flowed from the work that often they were doing in the operations. And so the more that people felt like the company shared the benefits of their work fairly through the community and weren't captured by particular parts of community, the lower their expectations. And so I think it's an important flip there, which is to say that the expectations of community wasn't driven largely by what the community were doing or thinking. It was in the control of the company, but not in a way that led to just in continually increasing the amount of investment or spending or whatever locally, and thinking carefully about how do we show that we're actually really careful about how we distribute benefits.
Thanks. We've had another question come up in the Q&A. I think I can answer this question. So the question is all this being covered by universities before students graduate? No. Thank you. Well, it's probably a glib answer, but actually I'd be interested to hear your guys' response to that as well. So, are people, I guess as observers and participants in this sort of social engagement or community engagement area, are you seeing that the professionals from other areas that you're dealing with are showing evidence of having received more training in this area? Or are they showing up pretty much without any, without the formal training, Actually, I might get Joel to go first.
Yeah, Joel, what's your experience?
I am seeing an increasing integration of expertise from people, environment background, working with anthropologists, and then some lawyers who have background in law working in the community relations space. There is one university in PNG that runs training on community relations that try to integrate all different aspects. But it's not what you get when you go out to the field. You go to the world that's unexpected of you. And to have all these different expertise out there trying to absorb all the data and process them. But what I've found is about channeling all this information back to the decision makers. And it sort of should feed back to engagement in the field. It's very useful to interact and engage with the communities, but you don't make the decisions. The decisions are made by people higher up. So how does that funnel back within this? It's one of the things I find challenging out in the field.
Yeah. Did you want to comment on that, Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, for me, actually speaking to that exact point, the biggest change I've seen in the last kind of 10 years has been how involved, interested and equipped GMs are in Australia in particular to be engaging with and understand the principles of the stuff we're talking about here, and just see it as a core part of their role. Not least because it's a key KPI for their role, but I think actually genuinely GMs are rising to the top who can run a three-dimensional operation that is smooth sailing. I think that's really important on the skills list now. And I had a VP level person the other day I've worked with previously at another site who was a GM there, and she was all over the literature around trust, and it was really amazing and fantastic. So I think that's a really impressive and important development. And then the other thing I'd say is that we used to work into mine sites just exclusively with the community engagement team, and then a lot of them got subsumed within the external relations team, so that group. But now what we see is from the start, we're working in cross-functional teams. So we'll be briefing them about the data, and it won't just be those engagement folk there, it'll be cross-functionally, because everybody, I think at senior levels at least, understands that every part of the business touches community in some way, and they need to be considering social risk in their execution of their role, whatever that role is. So social license is everybody's job, in fact, and everybody's an asset. And as I said earlier, we've often found that employees, not the engagement team or corporate, are the most trusted people from the company in the community. That's an asset that I think, well equipped could help a lot of companies.
Yeah. So as you can see, I've taken the remaining people, and I guess a lot of people have moved on, but there's a couple who haven't accepted the invitation yet. But I promoted everyone who wanted to panelist. So what that means is that you're all welcome to turn your camera on and microphone on and ask questions directly or make comments. This is the I guess what we call the virtual drinks part of the meeting, but actually usually nobody does much drinking, but anyway, there you go. Actually, I see there's a question from Paul Hethersay here's online, but Paul, did you want to ask your question directly? And hello, nice to see your name on a box at least.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so thanks for the talks. They've been really very interesting. But we find ourselves right in a situation where we've got a parliamentary committee talking about land access. So we get into the debate about how far does government regulation legislation go to promote best behaviour. And the tension is, when governments do it, it tends to be a bit lowest common denominator. It doesn't allow companies who have pride themselves on it to do their thing. So I'm interested in the panelists' view on what's the role of government in the discussions we've been having.
Yeah, look, my view around legislation, regulation is that it represents a lag indicator of community expectation, and by definition, and so companies that are interested in this space, and as you say, pride themselves on that area of performance, are always going to be outperforming that lowest common denominator. I think the key question there is, well, what's the incentive to do that, and is there, i.e., what's the reward? And I think the market is starting to recognise that beyond compliance performance, through things like access to cheaper finance, and that's only going to increase as the rise of ESG reporting and investing continues. And so Danone, the French dairy company, secured a significant facility and gets that money on cheaper terms if it can demonstrate that it's operating at better than average kind of ESG levels. And so I think my sense is that it's already a differentiator in terms of access to resources, and it will become an even more important differentiator in terms of access to capital, if you can demonstrate that you're able to manage social risk effectively. And in fact, I would say that, for an individual company, that regulation should just be in your rearview mirror, and then you should be thinking about what social performance means to you, and what are we trying to achieve with the relationship. That's the better question, but that's a very different question to what does it mean for industry, because it's the cowboys then that pull you down, right, and impact on you. But I guess I don't know about that either. I don't know if it is the cowboys that pull you down. I think they don't help, but actually mining's reputation is in not a great place currently, not because of what a small cowboy company did.
No, well, I mean, it's not been a good 2 or 3 years, has it? When you think about tailings disasters and more recent things around heritage caves and things. But actually, I had after this, anybody else who wants to pipe up with a question or a comment, please do so. But I had a question for Joel, and this has come up a few times. It came up in the presentation you and Sarah did. One thing I've noticed, and I've heard a few people say this, and I wonder if there's if people have thought about this more, or if there's a way to deal with it, is the amount of time that, there's this sort of progression in a project. Let's say you're successful in an exploration project, that you make a discovery, then you drill out the discovery. I've been in this situation where, and the geologist, when you're drilling out the discovery, the geologists and the exploration team, the advanced exploration team, are the kings and queens of the project, and they're the ones who have developed a relationship with the community. And then you pass to feasibility or pre-feasibility, and the geologists are very much a minor player in that whole process. Suddenly there's another whole team that comes in from the company, and that team suddenly becomes the face of the project. And I've certainly heard of projects and spoken to geologists who have said, and that's when everything went wrong. Talking about transitions, they're saying that's when the whole thing went to shit, because suddenly there were all these people who had no relationship with the community, and they were operating on a more transactional basis or whatever. And I was just interested, Joel, that, from your experience, have you been involved in that sort of transition, or have any thoughts on how we can do that kind of transition better?
Yeah, Rick, this is really a classic example of a project where I worked in, and the project is at its permitting stage, but the exploration has been going on for 51 years.
Oh, wow.
So you can see how that transition goes along, and the active role its department had at a particular time in the history of the project. So it's always between the geologist, and then you need the social space for the social data, because the project scope has changed. and then the environment team comes in. So it's been sort of an interplay between all of these actors within the different management and different system, because it's not one company all that managing that a project, across the time. So I think it goes back to what Sarah says about, if you have a consistent way of storing all the social data and orienting everyone in the company of how they can access and share this data and massage them into the network in the company. I think it's a great way of integrating all aspects, be across everything. I'm community affairs. I need to know the language that geologists use, and this is a time that's very rich because you are working with so many consultants across the time, and you kind of tap into all the knowledge base out there, and it's enriching for us out in the field. But I think it's important to involve everybody as a team, and it's not about us and them. And this is what I frequently find about being us and them in the field. That's when you get internal collision and trying to prioritize things between it's the safety business, it's the geology, it's the community relations. So it's about having a centrally coordinated data that can be shared and understood and interpreted correctly, across the team.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
I think just to add to that, Rick, I think it's a really good point, Joel. I think the piece that's really important to think through as well is, well, how do you motivate people to access that data and use it effectively? And you can motivate people in lots of different ways. But like, just to relate my personal experience the last couple of years. So we were a research team in CSIRO. It has its own culture. We moved out of CSIRO and formed this company, right? And we're growing steadily. And so actually, there's a lot more in my team now that had nothing to do with this in CSIRO than there are kind of old CSIRO people. And we're distributed. We're in Brisbane, we're in Sydney, we're in Melbourne, we're in Sao Paulo, we're in Zimbabwe. And so what I understand is, as we grow, to be able to consistently do what we do, culture is so fundamentally important. It's something that I think about a lot and obsess about, really, because it's really what motivates you to do something in a particular context without guidance. So it tells you how you're supposed to behave. And so, when I think about the first mine site that I ever went to, what really shocked me the most was how many signs there were that were telling me what I should do. So, the safety helmet and all that stuff, that's cool. But what I should eat, this is high fat, this is really good to eat, what your whiz should look like when you go to the toilet. It blew me away how paternal it felt. But what was never there was, well, how do we engage with people outside the fence? How do we interact with each other? What is the culture of this place in terms of relationships? And so I think in those transitions from small to medium to large teams like we're going through as a company, culture is fundamental. It's what helps you to endure and do things consistently and hang on to what you're about, your values. And I think it has to be fundamental in your values to value relationships with people outside the fence and to treat people well wherever they are. So that feels as about wishy-washy and huggy as I get, but I think it's actually really important. It's only since running a business that's growing that I've really kind of seen it firsthand.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Kieran. Paul, Paul Hethersay has his hand up, and I'm not sure if you, yes, okay, go ahead.
I'm enjoying the technology because it's working for me today. It hasn't been working for me all week. I'm just curious about, we're talking about measuring things, and I'm thinking I have an emerging large copper mine in the middle of a wheat belt in South Australia, and I'm sort of interested in how do we, again, from a government point of view, what can we do from a measurement point of view that might give us a bit of a clue as to what the community is really thinking as things evolve, but also potentially to come up with a way of making that transparent to everybody, that to show that it's not there's differing views, and trying to get to the heart of what the issues might be, and it gets there's a lot of anecdotal stuff. Certain say farmers are against it because it's change. Shop owners are all for it because it's new jobs, new money. Councils are ambivalent because they might see something down the track, but in the meantime all their roads are getting buggered up and there's no money to them. And I'm just interested, how do we, from a government point of view, how do we sort of tap into what the community is actually thinking, and also potentially where do we put money into to sort of assist the development so that you end up with a softer landing, as it were?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're doing that exact thing with Victorian government at the moment, so Department of Jobs, and they look after mineral resources too, because of exactly that issue, which is how do you give that investment the best chance to succeed, and understand systematically one, how to kind of regulate that space and how that operation develops, or operations, or a region, but also how do you shape your own policy to fill the gaps as well, and build capacity of community to be resilient, for example, in the face of change. So yeah, we do that stuff all the time. I think what's the role of government is a really good one, but being transparent and open in that process is really fundamental. But it's really hard for governments often who feel quite vulnerable in those spaces, particularly regulators who often want to stay out of the social space. I think you're getting a bit more into it now, but can be really challenging. So yeah, absolutely. I mentioned that big idea. I think what you're describing is something like that, in fact, which is mapping the social landscape, just like you've mapped the geological, making that data available to prospectors and exploration and developers, and using it as a way to raise the bar. So, I think we do things like put data onto websites, or interactive dashboards on public websites even, and make those processes really transparent. And that's with companies where there is some sensitivity that they have in doing that. But we're doing the same with Moreton Bay Regional Council, in fact, across the whole region, and all of that data is going to be available. And it's exactly for the same purpose. How do we understand what's anecdote and what's kind of, what's signal and what's noise? So yeah, I think it's a cool thing to talk about.
You're saying that's making me uncomfortable, Kieran, because we're actually working on a project in that area. I think it's a great idea. I also think it's a fantastic idea to it doesn't, we've been doing a lot of that for individual mines, developing a whole lot of proxies about various different measures that are social, environmental, and so on. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't do it for a region or a sub-region or any sort of geographic subdivision you care to mention.
And you're going to do that work anyway. You're going to spend budget on similar stuff anyway. I think how you do it is just really important. You can completely change the mood and the temperature around these issues by listening effectively, and that means transparently.